talking to Jennifer Matesa. Jennifer, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm 52 years old. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am a mom and a writer, and I teach writing at the University of Pittsburgh. I have four books. They're all about health and well-being, and the last two books have been about addiction and recovery, specifically physical recovery. And the first of those was called The Recovering Body, and it talked about essentially five disciplines or five ways our bodies heal from addiction. And then the second of those, which I just released last October, is called Sex and Recovery, a Meeting Between the Covers. And that's about sexuality and recovery, which is a topic nobody talks about. Which means that I always want to talk about it because I feel like that's my deal, is that I talk about stuff that nobody wants to talk about.
Do you kind of want to break into the Salt and Pepper song when people... Or is that just me? Oh. Okay, great. So why don't we talk about your first book? Let's talk about obviously we want people to buy the book, and without giving too much about it away, could you summarize those 5 stages that you just talked about of physical recovery?
Yeah, sure. So that would be the first book that I wrote about addiction and recovery, which is my third book. But the 5 ways. When I was asked the publisher came to me because I'd written a story about 3 triathletes in recovery, and they came to me and said, "Well, we want a book about exercise and recovery." And I said, "Well, okay, but I thought about it, and I thought, well, you can't write an entire book about exercise and recovery." And they said they wanted it to be about different physical stuff. So I said, well, okay, exercise definitely, and then there's clearly food, because so many people, especially women, and I found this out even more when I did the book about sexuality, when women get sober or when they get free from drug addiction, their eating issues come out. Our eating issues come out. So we have to talk about food. And then I thought, well, sleep is definitely another one, because sleep is a real killer. When we get free from drugs and alcohol, we really, like, one of our main relapse risks is not being able to sleep. A lot of people go on benzos, for example, or sleep aids when they quit drugs and alcohol. So they just go on a different drug. And then I thought to myself, meditation is actually a physical discipline, because when we meditate, we have to bring our bodies to the cushion or the mat or whatever and still them. And then the 5th one is pleasure, because when our bodies wake up, sexuality and pleasure, when our bodies detox, they wake up sexually. So I wrote a chapter about sexuality. And when I went out talking about the recovering body, I went to 3 or 4 cities, and all the questions I took were about sexuality.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because
so that's why I wrote the second book about addiction. Yeah.
People don't really talk about physical recovery. I think there's a sort of a heavy emphasis on 12-step recovery, and you go through the steps, and then that's a bridge to normal living. I mean, that's the traditional modality, isn't it? And
well, we're told it's a spiritual problem, and the solution is spiritual.
Yeah.
So then we don't talk about, I detoxed from fentanyl, which is the drug that's lacing heroin across this country and killing people. And not too many people manage to detox off of it, but I managed to detox, thank goodness. And in that entire first year, between 2008 and 2009, my body was just a wreck, and I was being told that I had to pray.
Oh my God!
Geez, I wasn't told I had to eat really good organic food regularly so I didn't get too hungry. I wasn't told I had to move. Moving is like the single best way that we can shorten our post-acute detox, post-acute withdrawal syndrome, which really kills people, especially on opioids. So and to protect our sleep, natural ways of protecting sleep. So I wasn't told any of that stuff.
And it really saddens me. I mean, my experience was that I was told immediately to get a bag of sweets, of candy,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and that
yeah,
I needed
yeah,
to replace the sugar in that respect, which I just found, because I spent the first couple of years exhausted, and
yeah.
that's why I started to write about my journey, because I gained 150 pounds at the end of
Wow.
my using. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I just, I feel so
And that is
passionate.
such a stress on the body. It's such
Yeah,
a stress. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've lost 50 now. I've still got probably another 50 to go.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wish that somebody had told me. And that's why I'm so glad to speak to you and to help raise awareness of what you're talking about, because I just feel that if I'd have known what we're talking about, I perhaps might not have been as exhausted and might not have had as many "is this it" moments.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you went to a 12-step program, but the 12-step
Yeah.
program dealing with alcohol actually has it in its basic text that we should just eat candy. A lot of 12-step meetings have big rafts of donuts and right
Yeah.
inside the door and huge urns of caffeine.
Yeah.
So yeah, and a lot of people at those meetings, and those meetings have saved my life, by the way, and I still go, but they smoke
Yeah.
and but yeah, the eating thing is a really important one, and if we quit alcohol in particular, alcohol is just changed into sugar in our bodies, so our bodies are not only detoxing from the alcohol, but they're detoxing from the sugar withdrawal, so of course we crave sugar.
Yeah.
So we're taught to just like eat sugar to satisfy that craving that can never be satisfied by eating sugar. So yeah, it really needs to be talked about.
And how, if you were to advise a person new into recovery now, what would you what kind of advice would you give them about how to look after their bodies in the way that we're talking about in early recovery?
Well, it depends on, I mean, as I say in the book, it depends a lot on what drug they're detoxing from.
Yeah.
Um, so, somebody detoxing from, a stimulant like meth or even Adderall, a lot of kids are taking Adderall
Yeah.
these days, will go through a different kind of physical process than somebody detoxing from like Xanax or, Vicodin or
Yeah.
something, or those are prescription drugs, but even alcohol or heroin. So, any depressants are like really very different from stimulants. So people who detox from stimulants feel really tired. They
Yeah.
feel like it's impossible to drag. Well, and people who detoxing from any drug really in the very beginning feel tired. But people detoxing from opioids in particular and from alcohol and benzos feel people with opioids. I felt like my arms wanted to just be pulled off, like we have restless leg syndrome and restless arm syndrome, and I just wanted someone to pull my arms off my body. That's the way I felt. And the only way I could actually relax in early recovery was to take a really hot bath. So I talk about hot baths in that book, and also when I finally could like actually walk around the neighborhood, I just loaded a playlist, like a really upbeat playlist on my phone, and I walked around as fast as I could, and then eventually I built up to running, and then I built up to cycling and playing tennis, and then I built up to P90X. So I just think exercise is just the most moving our bodies are just, it's just one of the most important healing modalities there is.
And would you say there is? I know that one of the people that reviewed your book talked about the disconnect between the physical aspects of your recovery and the spiritual aspects. Would you say that the exercise of mindfulness and that those are the connecting dots, if you like?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure which review you're referring to, but I think that um, exercise can be like, I mean, you talked to the triathletes that I spoke with,
Yeah.
for example, talk about how their practices are super mindful, like they're super meditative. They can become compulsive too.
Yeah.
So, I talked to one guy, Todd Crandall, who talked about how I think it was Todd, who talked about how he became super compulsive about his exercise, and he had to understand, like, the way that he judges whether he's becoming compulsive is whether it's taking away from his family time and the other things that he really loves, just the way drug addiction and alcohol addiction does. So, but those practices can be very mindful and meditative. Especially a lot of runners I know. And even walking the dog, I talk about how walking the dog is like, I mean, I have a dog, she's not here right now, but she's up in bed sleeping because I took her on a walk. And having a dog is a really great way of getting out.
Yeah, and you talk about the power of looking into your dog's eyes. And
yeah.
I love that. I would love a dog.
Yeah.
What I found is there is some resistance to talking about physical recovery, particularly when you start talking about the fact that certain foods, we're using in the same way as substances. What's been your experience of that? Has there been any resistance, or?
You mean to talking about it?
Yeah.
Well, I think that people, whenever you talk about drug addiction in connection with food and with sex, because they're all about appetites, people tend to confuse. I think there can be, especially with sexuality, there can become a confusion. Yeah, you're just using sex as another drug, know. So I think just as I said a moment ago about like monitoring, we learn to monitor ourselves for compulsive behavior. So I think addiction has two primary components. So there's one is the distortion of truth that goes on. So I tell myself, well, no, it doesn't really matter that I'm using it this way. Or I tell myself some kind of distortion about myself that makes me upset, and I want a substance to quell that.
Yeah.
And so then there comes an obsession, and I become obsessed with that substance. So I have to really guard against distortions of truth and obsessions. And as long as I'm using food in ways that are honest and to actually feed my body rather than to feed some kind of fear or obsession, then I feel like I'm okay.
Yeah. How do you find that this is being received with other people in the recovery community?
Well, I think it's been very, as I say, it's been very well received.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that there is, because there's been such a heavy influence from the 12-step communities, which focus on spiritual development rather than physical awareness, physical processes to heal. It's been it's not talked about as much, which is why I like coming on shows like this. So when you said at the top of the show that I've lost my train of thought, but you said something like, I talk about it a lot. Like I talk about sexuality and physical recovery. Actually, what I try to do is get other people to talk about it. So I actually spend a lot of time interviewing other people and asking them questions and trying to get them to think about it so that I can raise conversation. Yeah. So I think it's a little hard, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, do you find it's difficult?
I do. I found that people, particularly when you start talking about food and using food in a harmful way, and that not particularly nourishing your body, there is a huge resistance to that. And I think it's because like we're talking about, people thinking of it as a substance, and they feel threatened in some way. So I think when it is packaged in a way that is more palatable, so for example, if we talk about the benefits, you eat well, you're going to feel better. It's basic common sense, but wording it in that way has a different psychological response, I find. But people are starting to talk about it, and I think particularly in the online recovery community, it has been quite slow. But it is opening.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about. It's interesting to me. So you talk mainly about how to use food appropriately. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah, and people's journeys with food in their recovery. Like you were saying earlier, that when people stop using and they get clean and sober, that they discover that sometimes there is an underlying eating disorder. I mean, that's been my experience.
Well, yeah.
And that has been quite common in a lot of people that I've spoken to, and it's not limited to just women.
No, it's not. I've talked to men about that
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
I found that people don't want to approach the subject. It is only when they get to a point of feeling uncomfortable in the same way that they did with drugs.
Well, maybe that is the key. I think that it's very hard, and this is a tremendously addictive society, right?
Yeah,
And so practically anything that we do can be addictive. I mean,
yeah,
screens are addictive. We can binge on Netflix, or Amazon videos. I
yeah.
mean,
Facebook.
Facebook, social media is
Yeah,
tremendously addictive. So when we give up, like what I find for myself, the resistance in myself is this. So if I give up drugs and alcohol,
yeah,
right, then I'm thinking, well, I want to be really good, so I should really give up all sugar, and not only all sugar, but all refined products.
yeah,
And then maybe I should start eating paleo.
yeah,
And then maybe I should like not eat any meat
yeah,
because, you know what I mean? So it becomes more and more extreme. And I think maybe some of the resistance that people have is about that. And I've really struggled with that myself because I like to do things right. I want to do things, I want to support my body as much as I can, but I've had to understand that, okay, so for my migraines, I have to take medication.
yeah,
If I'm depressed, I might have to take medication,
yeah.
and that's not necessarily bad.
No.
I can't be a purist about this stuff, but some recovery modalities expect us to become purists
Yeah,
about, they're a bit purist about it.
yeah,
And then a lot of our personalities are just super perfectionistic.
yeah, yeah. Totally. I mean, I
Yeah.
think in my journey over the past few years, I did become vegan at one point, and I was a gluten-free vegan, which was fairly restrictive. I mean, I
Wow.
felt amazing, but it
Yeah.
wasn't sustainable. And I think that's what my message is. That I would like people to talk about and people to have the information about how to eat in a way that sustains their body, that's easy to maintain, that they can still have pleasure with food, but it
Right.
doesn't become obsessive.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
I talk a lot about like sustainable pleasure in the book about sex, because I think another problem with this is that people, when we get sober and clean, we become afraid of pleasure.
yeah. Let's
Yeah.
move on to sex then.
Okay.
Why do you
Happy
think?
to.
Why do you think people? Why are leading on from what you just said? Why are people afraid of pleasure?
Well, people in recovery, because
Yeah,
I think that pleasure reminds them. Pleasure can be very intense in
yeah,
recovery, and it can remind us of like it can lead us to want to use pleasure to escape, and that can remind us that we can't escape from life anymore, that we need to avoid those situations,
yeah,
or be conscious of the situations that in which we're using pleasure to escape, and so we want to just abstain from all pleasure,
yeah.
and that is not sustainable.
No.
I've really, quite frankly, questioned whether it's possible for me to abstain from chocolate, for example. Like, should I just never
And
have
is
another
it?
orgasm either? Like, I mean,
Yeah, no fun. Recovery can't be fun. Yeah.
right. Yeah. I mean, and it's not just fun, it's like pleasure, it's like desire, it has to do with appetite,
Yeah,
like the hunger of the flesh
yeah,
that we experience. It's a very fleshly thing.
yeah. It's
And
an
and, and
innate.
it's laden with moral judgment.
Yeah, it's an. I was. Answered some questions about sex and recovery. I think Helena wrote something recently. She spoke to you as well,
Yeah.
and she was talking about the fact that people, there's this misconception. I feel it's a misconception that guys in recovery are predators, and you need to
Yeah.
be really careful, and blah blah blah. And I was saying, look, I think guys get a really bad name. I've seen women be just as provocative. But actually, I think what we forget is that we can't shut that innate human desire down. We were created to procreate. It's part of our being. So, it seems bizarre to say, no, you can't be sexually attracted to somebody, and, it's just, I find it really unhelpful. What's been your experience of, the guidance that we received in the early days? Like, let's not have sex for a year.
Well, when I entered recovery, I was married and I got no guidance. I wasn't single, so I wasn't told not to have sex for a year, although I was, I heard plenty of people get that advice. Plenty of young people, which is really insane. It's a real deterrent to entering recovery, I think, if you slap like a kind of arbitrary year label on that. So I didn't get any advice, which meant that I was like largely left on to my own experience, and because there are only 578 words in my basic text about sexuality. There really wasn't that much to go on, So some people, like I'd heard, some people write a sex ideal, which means, some people think of that as like my ideal partner, but that's not what sex ideal actually means. It's like your values and your ideals with regard to sexuality. And I didn't really write one of those, but I conceived of one in my mind, and I did do a couple of sex inventories, and with a couple of different sponsors. But the problem, my marriage really suffered because I had manipulated my sexuality, my sexual response with drugs, and that was like super dishonest. And then when I got into recovery, I couldn't do that anymore. So I didn't know what was happening to my body sexually. That was like really primarily what was happening. Was I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't know how to bring it up with anyone. I knew that like my marriage was suffering, and I felt like it was my fault. So I felt like a lot of shame and self-blame about it, and those are the questions that went into writing about this project. Yeah.
So what do you think would be a helpful discussion to have with somebody, that's new around? What kind of guidance would you give them?
Well, if I were working with new people, which I have worked with new people, I would ask them to if they were interested in looking at their sexual history and maybe some of the harms that have been committed to them and some of the harms that they had committed to other people. I would talk with them about that. And with regard to like whether to abstain or not, I just think that abstain from sex, that is. I think that the most important thing about recovery is to get to know oneself.
Yeah.
And with regard to sexuality, it's to get to know one's own desires and like we were talking about, one's appetites, one's own body, feel comfortable in one's own skin and feel comfortable with understanding one's own capacity for pleasure and intimacy with oneself. And then we can start to share that with other people. And for some people that might be, 6 months, and other people might need 6 years to do that. And it's like really up to the person. But I think it's worth, I've heard of married people with the recovering person needing to like pull away from sexual intimacy for a while. In fact, I just talked with somebody the other day about that in this video series that I'm doing. But I think it's worthwhile thinking about that in whatever relationship you're in, just to take a break for a while, because everything rebuilds. Like you have to rebuild everything.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think certainly my experience was that the way in which I equated worth to sexual interest in me, and it's a minefield, particularly in relation to how your self-esteem develops, how you develop with your body, and I think perhaps I see some value in suggesting to abstain, but I don't see it that it's that practical.
Well, I think it's mostly important to abstain from getting into like relationship entanglements. I think it's really impractical to abstain from sex altogether.
Yeah.
So if you, I mean, I think of it in terms of practice sex. Like if you have if you run into somebody on some online platform, or if you have there's someone in your life who comes into your life, or there's someone in your life already with whom you can practice um, sex, then I've heard tons of stories about this, and it's very helpful, just to practice with someone. Um, so yeah, and it can be really a tremendous help in building one's recovery rather than taking away from. But if we get all entangled in some relationship, I mean, I think I've heard tons of stories from people who talked about how when they were new in recovery, like you just said, any attention from someone
Yeah.
of the sex that they were interested in, or the sexual orientation,
Yeah.
just drove them mad with, like, it activated all that dopamine
Yeah.
stuff that goes on,
Yeah.
I think it's really, yeah, super important to be careful of that, because that sets off the obsession that we were talking about before.
Yeah. How do you, is it possible to have practice sex without being emotionally involved?
So, am I speaking as an expert here?
Well, I don't
I
know. I
think
mean,
it.
it's
I
just
think it. I think it is, depending on the people. I think it is entirely possible to have practice sex without becoming emotionally. I would say not emotion. Like, it's not about not caring about the person, but without becoming entangled. With everyone being on the same page, saying, "Hey, you know what? Like, I'd really like to get it on with you tonight, or today, but I just really, I can't. I'm not in a place where I can be like." I can be in a relationship right now that is like a committed relationship for the long haul, but it's like I cannot, but we're here and we're feeling it, and let's get it on. I mean, I just think that's entirely possible. Yeah. And I think our society doesn't want us to think that,
No, because we attach
Yeah.
words like promiscuity
Sure.
to those situations,
Yeah. I've heard of people in recovery being told by their sponsors that they were sex addicts if they wanted to have sex inside recovery without a commitment.
Yeah.
I think that's really inappropriate, especially if your sponsor is not a therapist. I mean, no one can diagnose you with a sex addiction unless they're qualified to do that. So there's a lot of moral judgment that's placed, especially on women who want to just go out and have sex.
Yeah, because
Very
I feel
powerful position for us to take. Yeah, I want sex.
Yeah, I feel like for me that I have been advised that that perhaps it's more in line with my values to seek out a loving relationship, but actually, I think it's useful to discuss the fact that you can set healthy boundaries and have practice sex and not entangle yourself. I think that's really useful, a really useful point.
I think it's useful also if you have a community of people in recovery who can support you in that, because there are people who can support. You probably find people who will support you in whatever is good for you at the time. So I've heard of people doing that, and like being supported by small communities of people, like trusted people in recovery, even outside of recovery, who will say, yeah, that's good for you. It's okay. Because it then takes that moral judgment off of you, and you can engage in the practice.
Yeah, because then you attach shame to the behaviour, don't you? And then you don't want to engage in it, and it gets entangled in the whole addictive type situation. So that's really, really interesting. But so if somebody was predominantly surrounded by people in 12-step fellowship, how do they find those small pockets of people that would support that?
Well, I mean, in my case, how do we find any pockets of people that support us? We share how we feel in small settings, and we start one-on-one, and then one friend leads to another friend, and then those two friends lead to a few more friends, and then suddenly we have a little tiny posse who can support us. I mean, in my recovery, I've been involved in some of the meetings that I've gone to that have been the best for my recovery have been off the books meetings that have been like in somebody's office at a university, or in someone's home that got started because someone was ill and they needed a meeting to be brought to their house, and a few women met, and then suddenly in the living room of someone's house took place this really interesting discussion that would never take place in a church basement.
No. And what is your view on sharing intimately in the church basement, about sex and about intimacy and about...
My view on it, like, is it good, is it bad, is it how to do it?
Well, because I feel like there is this general unwritten rule that you don't share those intimate details.
There's a general unwritten rule in our society that we don't share those details. So it's not just about recovery communities, it's about American and particularly Northern European societies that are like that. And the science that I present in the book shows that. So the further you move down in the States, like into California and down toward southern Florida, and then when you cross the border into Latin America, forget it. You can start sharing.
How amazing.
But, so I've brought up sexuality at one meeting, and it was very difficult. It was a very difficult discussion. People didn't want to talk about it, but it was a meeting for everyone, men and women. And I've been in one other meeting that was it was an all women's meeting, and a woman very new in recovery brought up sexuality. I think she had maybe 3 months, and said that it was a real strain on her marriage. She didn't know how to do it except to talk about it in a meeting, and it was an epic meeting. It was an amazing meeting. I still remember the stuff that was said in that meeting, and it was probably 5-6 years ago. So it depends on the meeting and the people in the meeting. But I think this person's sponsor had advised her to bring it up, and it was a really good experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm always really open to people discussing anything that affects their recovery. And
you have to be aware that there are people in the meetings are filled with sick people. So you have to be careful.
Yeah. So I think the advice is that the intimate details you might discuss with your sponsor, or a close friend.
Or you don't share names. Yeah.
No, exactly. But to talk about sexuality and to talk
the
about
ideas.
Yeah, I think it's really useful. But and the more that we talk about it, that I feel like similarly with addiction, right? There's less shame attached to it. It becomes more apparent. Wow, so that's really interesting. I think actually we've got, how long have we got now? We've got 30 minutes. What do you think? Is there anything else that do you think is worthwhile talking about? Or?
Well, I would just like to mention that I have a secret Facebook group for women, for women who want a safe space to discuss sexuality and inside recovery. It just started like 3 days ago, so I'm still building up energy in that group. But if there are people out there who are interested, who want to ask questions or just find a safe space online to talk about it, that's private. They can go to my Facebook author page and message me through that author page, and I add anyone based on their desire to be in it. But it's very confidential, and the principles of conduct are posted in that group. And I also have a very new video series of people who are out there in their recovery. It just launched yesterday with Laura Frazier, and so I'll be running a new one each week, but I for a while anyway. So women and men, and I would like, and they can just Google my name and they'll come up with my YouTube channel, and it's on there. So I'm really just doing my best to draw attention to this issue, because I just think it's kind of crazy that we don't talk more about sex in the society. There are two books especially that have influenced my opinion on that issue. And I think it's really unhealthy not to talk about it in recovery communities. I think we need to front the issue and build language for us to talk about it. So definitely.
It's so good to see your face finally. You know,
Thanks, Liv.
We've talked, you know, online, but it's always lovely to sort of meet people and connect. I think you get a greater connection when you see someone's face.
I'm really happy to collaborate with people. I'm really interested in sharing resources and sharing power to build more healing. So
Same
yeah.
here.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
It's so nice to see you.
And you.
Okay, I'll look forward to seeing it.
Okay.
Okay.
See you
All right,
soon.
honey.
Bye.
Take good care of yourself.
Bye.
Bye.